Next Generation, original series. Yeah, sorry.
From the old movies of 30 years ago and beyond,
to the world of the new films of the last 30 years.
To the movies that are now playing, this is Old, New, and Now Playing. And now, here's your host, Will Robinson Smith.
Hello and welcome to Old, New, and Now Playing, your time machine through the world of movies. If this is your first time joining me, welcome. And if you're returning, it's great to see you coming back. And so we're continuing our week full of Star Trek goodness. Of course, Star Trek Beyond is coming out this weekend. We started off things with Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, and we're continuing with Star Trek First Contact. This will be another one of my Phone a Friend reviews. And joining me once again to talk about all things Star Trek is my friend from the Gulf Coast area and Star Trek enthusiast, Jamey Ward. Jamey, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Hey, well, thanks for having me back.
So, for those of you out there who don't know what First Contact is about, Star Trek First Contact is the second film in the series based on the Next Generation cast. The movie came out in 1996, 2 years after the series ended, and debuted near the beginnings of two other Star Trek spin-offs, Deep Space Nine and Voyager. The movie starts with a callback to the second time our heroes encounter the villainous alien race known as the Borg. Back then, Captain Picard, played by Patrick Stewart, was assimilated by the Borg and brought into their collective mind. He escaped then, but is still haunted by that. In present day, the Borg are attacking Earth, and Picard decides that the Enterprise and her crew have to help. They destroy the main ship, but a small vessel goes back in time to try and cripple an important event in Earth's history. Picard and crew go back in time to try and stop them. And while an Earth-based crew attempts to keep history on course, those that remain on the Enterprise are battling to save their ship, which is under siege by the hostile aliens. So Jamey, as a long-time hardcore Star Trek fan, what were your impressions of watching First Contact again?
Oh, well, I thought it was a great attempt at bringing back a big enemy from the Next Generation series, in the Borg. I thought it was pretty action-packed. There was a lot of ups and downs in the film, a lot of internal conflicts, with Picard, being part of the collective at one point, and then kind of working through those types of things and the dichotomy within him. Really good movie, I thought.
One of the things that I noticed, for me personally, was there was kind of a pacing problem, I thought, with the film, because it starts off really action-packed. You get Picard and the Enterprise E coming back to stop the Borg. They go back in time. They send the crew down to Earth. They're dealing with the Borg on the Enterprise, and then there's like a big lull that just kind of sets in on the film. And I don't know. I felt like it felt like different films at different times. What was your take on that? Did you see that same problem?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Like you said, there was kind of action-packed going into it. I think the premise of the story I don't think they could have chosen a better quote enemy than the Borg to put in this type of film, and I think that was kind of their push with this to let's get a nice, good action-packed film going on and deal with a pretty formidable enemy. And then you're right, it just kind of at some point we had that story going on, and then there was sort of I don't know, a gulf there. So I would agree with that.
Well, I mean, there was Cochrane's side story, and a couple of different elements that they were trying to juggle at the same time, which, I give the movie credit for trying to keep a lot of balls in the air. I just, like we were saying, thought that it could have done a better job of either having a slower pace up top or a faster pace once it got to the middle. It just felt a little disjointed for me. But when thinking about the two casts, as someone that's been a long time Star Trek fan, did you find, looking back on it, that you gravitated more towards that original series cast, with the Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and those guys, or more with Picard's crew with Patrick Stewart and that cohort? What did you think about the two together, or compared to one another?
Well, definitely being a long-term Star Trek fan, I always found, the dynamic between the original crew already had a certain quality to it that I felt like the Next Generation cast was always trying to, not necessarily recreate, but trying to find the same types of dynamic. Usually, like in the old cast, it was really those main three characters that started that dynamic, and there was a certain flow with that. Whereas the Next Generation cast, you really didn't have, like a main three. You had several different cast members interacting together, and I don't know that it ever found, this is the big dichotomy with Star Trek fans. You're kind of either one or the other in a certain sense. But I don't know that the Next Generation cast ever really found its niche, so to speak, as far as the dynamic between the characters. And that's just my opinion.
Right, and when you think about some of the main plot points, and I'm thinking most specifically about the sort of the antagonist cohort, the Borg that you mentioned earlier. Like you said, it was definitely a fan favorite enemy, as I understand it. They had a presence throughout the Next Generation series, coming up in, I think it was episode 2 of season 2 when they were first introduced, and then the storyline of Picard getting incorporated into the Borg was end of season 3, beginning of season 4, if I was understanding that correctly. And so I think for someone that's more newly being introduced into the Star Trek lore, I found like the whole idea of the Borg was a little insider baseball, within the context of the movie. It just seemed like the movie came at the audience with an understanding that there was a certain basis of knowledge that the audience would be going into, and maybe that was the case back in '96 when it came out. I mean, obviously I was 5 at that point in time, so I didn't have any kind of that knowledge. But watching it for you as having been a long-term fan, did you find that having watched the series that enhanced your enjoyment of seeing the Borg then brought to life on the big screen, or what was your impression of that element of the movie?
Well, yeah, I think being a long-term fan of the whole series and then watching those episodes with the Borg and then trying to push that into a movie in and of itself, I felt, especially compared to some of the other movies with the Next Generation cast, I thought that was a good thing for them to do. In a certain sense, they were reaching to put something exciting into one of the Next Generation movies. Because, some of the movies that came out of the Next Generation to me were like, it's a good storyline, but it didn't really keep your attention. And I think this was a good attempt in it. And I think it did, as far as a lot of the Next Generation movies, keep your attention more than some of the other ones that were out there. I think maybe another one that did that for me wasn't necessarily a fan favorite was Nemesis, which was later down the road. But I think that was just because of some of the actors that were in it. That was one of the first movies that Tom Hardy ever did. Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good attempt. I just don't know that it, the Next Generation movies necessarily, at least for me as a Star Trek fan, didn't keep my attentions like some of the older ones did, I guess.
Just didn't quite stick the landing as well.
That's kind of, that would be a good analogy. Yeah, I mean, it's it brought a lot to the party, but didn't just totally bowl me over, so to speak.
Right, and of course, one of the big things whenever you look at a big spectacle space film is obviously the special effects, and there were a couple things that really caught my eye. I think the Borg Queen was done really well, of course, played by Alice Krieg. In watching the effect in the scene when she's first introduced, and you see her coming down on the crane with just her spinal column, and then she comes down. I thought that was a really cool effect because what they did was they had the actress in like a blue body sock that was lying on a platform, and then they brought that down and they composited a couple of different shots. They shot just the background, and then they shot her with the background and programmed the camera so it was the same shot following her in, so they could just remove her body. I thought that was a cool effect. Were there certain other elements beyond the Queen that really caught your attention?
Well, one of the big things is something I always pay attention to just about every Star Trek movie, whether it's old or new. The new Enterprise was pretty cool too. I found that even in the older movies, it's like every time the Enterprise went out, it got pummeled. I mean, either got beat up in a firefight or got destroyed completely because of the self-destruct thing. So it was kind of neat to see that new version of the Enterprise. But you mentioned also Alice Krieg playing the Borg Queen. Lots of great effects with that, but couldn't have cast a better actress to have played that, because she has a nice little, a nice subtle combination of being that evil person, but she's also had a for lack of a better term, a sensuality to the Borg.
And, I thought the interplay between her and Data was nice when they first get introduced to each other. That was an interesting scene, and just introducing the concept of what it means to be human and contrasting that with the pursuit of what the Borg views as perfection, and whether that means giving up more of the humanity that some of the other characters exemplify, or, funneling their energy more towards being synthetic. What did you think about sort of that thematic element of the movie?
Yeah, I thought that was a nice dynamic as well, and I thought it interesting that the Borg Queen looked at Data, looked sort of down upon Data for striving to be more human, versus her concept of it. She admitted that there was a needed melding of human and machine to reach the perfection, but her idea of it was more toward the machine side, and his was more toward being human. So I thought that was a nice interplay of those roles. And I don't know about you, I couldn't quite understand what her final goal was to a certain extent. Was she really trying to pull Data into this as, quote, the perfect intermixing of the two, or did she really truly want Picard, because that was the whole idea to begin with of assimilating him in and making him look Locutus? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of left up to interpretation. I really didn't figure out what side of that I fell on, by the end of the film, but I don't know, I kind of let that one go. But the thing that my big sort of gripe coming out of it, as far as the Borg are concerned, was, I guess, the problems that come when you introduce the idea of, fully conscious thought process between all the different Borg. There's an actual term for it, the common thought, whatever. But later on in the film, and I won't go into too many spoilers with this, but there's a scene when the Enterprise crew is trying to thwart part of the Borg's plot, and they're doing something very active around the Borg sphere, which, because apparently when they're not perceived as a threat, they don't bother dealing with them, which, that's a whole another thing. But you see a very specific shot of one of the Borg, noticing that something's going on, but then they go back to what they're doing, and then they keep fiddling with it, then they have another one of those shots, and then eventually one of the Borgs deals with, I think it's Rolf at that point, and, punctures his suit. But then the other two, Picard and another crew member, are still working at it, and it's not until the plan is almost foiled that the Queen suddenly realizes, oh, there's a problem here. I should do something about that. I don't know, that just seemed like a weird, sort of disjointed interpretation of what this groupthink was, and I don't know. Am I reading too much logic into the Star Trek movies? Should it be just viewed as more?
Because the deal with the Borg was, all right, supposedly, a good example, when they first start taking over the ship, those Borg, as these humans are up in the Jeffries tube, immediately attack the crew of the Enterprise. And then when Picard leads his crew up there, don't do it, don't move, don't do anything, and they'll ignore you. So at what point is it considered a threat for them to deal with? And I think your point is exactly valid. It's kind of a nebulous thing, and it's hard to figure out. In a certain sense, it's to either make a decision. Either they're going to ignore you or they're going to attack you. At what point do we make that decision as the collective of the Borg? I don't know.
And, as someone that obviously knows the shows a lot better than I do, having not watched any of the shows specifically, but, when you look at Star Trek as a whole and as a collective, is the series more about the ideas and the themes and just sort of the sense of adventure that goes along with that, as a marriage, or, does it try to answer things more, logically and deal with, plot points and potential plot holes as they come up, I guess. Is this something that, fans of Star Trek just kind of overlook, or is that really not an issue in the TV show?
Well, I think it depends on which fan that you're talking to and talking about. There are some fans out there that want to pick every little essence of it apart and really stick to different points, and they'll defend these details to the hill and debate them ways to Sunday. And I think I fall into a different category. I look at it, when I watch X episode or X movie, did I enjoy it? Was I entertained? And yes, I think some of those details are important, but I'm one that doesn't get, or at least I try not to get caught up in too many details, because I think they can debate those too poignantly, and for lack of a better term, I think they take it to a certain extreme that kind of takes away from the fun of it.
That's fair. And so I guess that's a good point to sort of bring it to our final thoughts about the film. We've hit a lot of points about the character, the characters, the plot, some of the things that, there could be considered issues, but general overall sort of wrap-up thoughts. And then if you had to rate this movie on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being, completely perfect film, I wouldn't change a thing. 1 being, this is utter garbage. I would, just as soon take this out of my Blu-ray player, snap it in half and light it on fire. Where does this film fall for you on the scale? And what are some of your final thoughts about it?
I think my final thoughts about it are, I think it was a nice attempt for a next generation movie to get into the forefront, have a good action film with a nice clear-cut enemy, develop some things with some certain characters. That, again, the dichotomy with Picard. Do I want to destroy these guys totally? What is my thought here? I don't want to give up the Enterprise. Those sorts of things. So there was a nice interplay with them, an internal struggle. So I think in general it was a really good movie as far as that goes. Relatively action packed, relatively okay character development. On a scale of 1 to 10, I probably put it. If we're talking next generation movies specifically, I would put it higher, a pretty high ranked film of the next generation. So at least an 8 in that situation, but as a film in general, 86.
That's fair. I think for me as, like just a casual Star Trek fan, I thought there was a lot to love here. I thought some of the characters were really compelling, but, seeing some of the plot holes, which for me, I tried to sort of put that on the back burner as much as possible, but it kind of kept weighing on me the more they just sort of kept harping on some of those things that I felt detracted from the movie a little bit. So overall, I'd probably give it about a 5 out of 10, I think, maybe 5.5. It's definitely a fun movie. I think if you are a Star Trek fan, like you are, Jamie, and for you out there, if you're a Star Trek fan that hasn't seen this movie, I'd say it's definitely a must watch, especially before you go see Star Trek Beyond this weekend. But for just a casual film fan, it was a bit insider baseball. There's a hologram scene, which I think harkens back to an episode of Next Generation that I had to look up specifically because I didn't really know what was going on there. But overall, it's a fun movie. If you just sort of go along for the ride, I think you'll have a good time with it. And speaking of good times, Jamie, thanks so much for joining me, man. Again, this has been a lot of fun.
Man, I appreciate you having me, and hopefully we'll do this again, maybe on some future films. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. And for those that want to follow you online, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Jamie17.
Great. And of course, you can always find me at W_Robinson Smith on Twitter. And on Instagram, it's Will_Robinson_Smith. And so thanks again to Jamie for being our guest today. That will do it for this episode of Old, New, and Now Playing. If you've had a chance to see Star Trek First Contact, what did you think of the film? And what's your favorite Star Trek movie from any of the different generations? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and live long and prosper.